weird about it. Just try to just be normal. And so you just say, I think God spoke. And I do that actually a lot. Now, they probably haven't heard anybody say that recently. So then you just go on. And if they don't have the guts to ask you about it, they're thinking about it. They're like, what do you mean God spoke to him? What is that? Or, I was just, I said this in one of the services this morning, I was feeling kind of tired the other day, and there's this weirdest thing in the, one of the books, ancient books called Matthew. This guy that wrote a book a couple thousand years ago about Jesus, and it says that if you're tired, you can come to Jesus and he'll give you rest. And I thought, well, that's kind of weird. And I was feeling tired, so I didn't really know how that worked, but I kind of went, all right, Jesus, I'm tired. I could use some rest, and it's great. I don't know how this happens, but honestly, this is the way I actually felt like immediately kind of like, oh, wow. But anyway, and then you just go on. Now, you can't make it a sermon. You can't preach to your unbelieving friends. It doesn't even really work to preach to us, does it? That's one reason why I kind of preach in this style, because I'm trying to make it feel to you like I'm not preaching to you, but I'm actually really I'm really tearing you up. I mean, really, if you think about what I've said, I'm like saying pretty much everything that you think is really dumb, and you should think all new thoughts. And then I go, and then you kind of laugh, wait a minute here, I mean, really, I've kind of kicked you in the teeth a few times, haven't I? I mean, I've really ripped on a bunch of stuff that are our pet favorite little things, but I do it with some jokes. I try to make fun of myself and say, who knows, and I'm probably wrong, and, whatever, and then you kind of laugh a little bit, and we go on, and it's smooth, and then you go home and think about it, and you kind of go, I think he's talking about something that I've never really actually ever thought about before. And I actually hope you have those thoughts, because I think what I'm saying is actually really fairly different than most people. And so you obviously are prepared. There's a lot of foundational stuff in this church that's obviously been built in, or you wouldn't take it as well as you are, actually, because I've been hard on you guys more than most. So you say something to this guy, and what happens is there's a little positive response, and at some point, he just has he gets an arrow, basically. Let's just make it a little short arrow there, okay? And it's kind of pointing, no, it's not pointing right. It's pointing like this direction. He's not quite getting it right. It's kind of like, oh. Or you just say something about Jesus. You know what I tell people my ministry in the Muslim world is? My ministry in the Muslim world, I used to say it was planting churches or evangelism or whatever. Now I say my ministry in the Muslim world is to give Muslims permission to think and talk about Jesus on a large scale. That's what I'm doing. I'm going to the Mufti of Saudi Arabia. I'm getting the Mufti of Damascus and the Mufti of Mecca to write a paper. They've written it now. Write a paper saying Muslims ought to be talking about and thinking about Jesus. It actually has the official stamp of the Mufti of Mecca of Saudi Arabia on it that I now have in Arabic and in English. And I go everywhere I go, hey, Muslim guy, this is awesome. The top Mufti in the world, the Grand Mufti of Mecca said, you should be thinking about Jesus. This is amazing. I'm thinking about Jesus. We should think about Jesus together. Well, I'm a Muslim and I don't really, well, I don't know. Your Mufti says you should be doing it, so I don't know, whatever, And they're like, oh, wow, okay. Because Muslims believe in Jesus just like everybody out here believes in Jesus. If you go around most of America and say, by the way, George Barna did a poll, 95% of Americans still, if they have to check a religious box, check the box, Christian. So most Americans still, by far, most Americans still think of themselves as Christian. So if you say to most of them, do you believe in Jesus? They go, yeah, well, sure, yeah, of course. Just like Muslims. They believe in Jesus too. So I'm just kind of going around to top leaders in the Muslim world saying, hey, it's fantastic that you guys believe in Jesus. This is really exciting. You should talk about him a lot more, because you talk about Muhammad quite a bit. Muhammad, by the way, is 3 times in the Quran. Jesus is over 90 times in the Quran. Jesus has a highly exalted status in the Quran, way more than Muhammad. But yet Muslim culture says talk about Muhammad and don't talk about Jesus. Why is that? Because they're offended at Jesus because they're hurt by us. So I'm trying to help them get unhurt, to get over that hurdle. So these guys are kind of going this direction here. And then just more and more. So what do we call this? This is very simple. It's this. Now this word, another word that's not in the Bible. Do you know that word evangelism doesn't ever appear in the Bible? Shocking for people. Evangelist appears twice. Philip was called an evangelist, and then one of the gifts in Ephesians 4 is listed as evangelist. But to do evangelism isn't in the Bible. What's in the Bible? What does the Great Commission say? Go and make disciples. So now, how do you make a disciple? If I ask people, if I say this, how many of you feel really comfortable to go out and do evangelism? There were, like I said in the service, some of you would say yes, you are comfortable with that, and you're probably an evangelist. So great, fair enough. And I hope there's many of you. But let's say there's 10 of you out of 200 or 300 here. Maybe 10 of you would say, yes, I'm an evangelist. I can just go anywhere, talk to anybody about Jesus, and it always works well. So just talking to people about Jesus doesn't make you an evangelist. If you're actually not seeing people come to Christ, then you're not an evangelist. Most of you, though, if I said, how many of you would feel comfortable with your friend at work, just kind of hanging out with them, loving them, and just sharing things that come to you naturally, and that from day one until here, discipling him, mentoring him, just kind of walking with him, encouraging him in things of God? I'll bet most of you would raise your hand. And if I said, who feels more comfortable in this realm or this realm, I guess as you'd all raise your hand. So oddly enough, this is biblical and this isn't. Isn't that great? I mean, I think that's great news. This is not, I don't think this is anti-biblical, by the way. I think it's not anti-biblical. It's just not particularly biblical. It's not the model you see. I always ask people, how did Jesus evangelize the 12? And I have people write it down. How did he evangelize the 12? And they kind of go, evangelize the 12. And they write down some things kind of tentatively, which are all principles of this. And then I say, they weren't called the 12 evangelists because he wasn't evangelizing them. He was discipling them. When did he start? Well, day one. Follow me. They dropped their nets, followed him. When did they start? Right then. Where were they? They were down here somewhere. They were way out here. When did the disciples get saved? Actually, I'm not sure. Were they saved at the cross? At the cross, they still all ran away but John. The day after the cross, Peter, or the same later that night or whatever, Peter denied him with curse words. That doesn't sound much like a saved person. That sounds like a person that's a little confused, has got an arrow, but kind of off a little bit, kind of going this way, but not quite getting it right. When did they really finally get it right? Acts chapter 2, the Holy Spirit comes, Spirit of all truth, who says to them, this is the deal. And then I'm sure the next morning they woke up and going, oh, so that's what he was talking about when he said, Jonah in the belly of the well and tear down the temple. And, oh, man, they're probably going, can you believe how embarrassing? We never got that before. Now we got it. So I think there is a point. I think there's a line here. In this model, you can see Kirk is still out, and I'm in. So there is a line. There is a line right there. I do it as a dotted line. Because in John chapter 3, just before our favorite, born-again verse in John 3 and John 3:16, it says, the Spirit's like the wind. You don't know where it comes from, and you don't know where it's going. The Spirit's like the wind. Can you see wind? No, you cannot see wind. What do you see? You see the effects of wind. Hasn't it been true that much of our life we thought somebody was in, only to notice years later there's never been any effect of the wind of the Spirit in their life? They're not acting in it all. So it's not our job to judge. I'm just saying that there is an in and an out. There is a kingdom of light and a kingdom of darkness. There is a point where you kind of come in and come out, I think, but you don't always know when it is. Because I've had lots of people pray the prayer and they say they're in, but they don't look very in. I know other people who have never prayed the prayer who are clearly closer to Jesus than I am. And it happened, many of the great, John Wesley and many of the great leaders of the faith didn't kind of have an evangelical conversion. They just kind of wandered into the kingdom, and they find themselves there one day, and then they're in. So I think you can do it by praying a prayer. That's fine. Or you can just say, we're going to decide, when do I stop discipling that person? Hopefully, really never. Do you think somebody's still trying to disciple Carl? I actually have whole teams of people working on me. I'm not easy. So I have people. When do I stop being a disciple of Jesus, a follower of Jesus? Well, hopefully never. I want to be getting closer to Jesus all the time. Discipleship is always happening in your life. You are always discipling others. When do you start? When do you start discipling your neighbor? This afternoon, as soon as you want. And you do it bit by bit, and there will be moments that are big and dramatic, There might be a moment when you do know that the person comes into the kingdom, which is exciting, and may it be. Acts 2 kind of moments, may there be more of those, but it might just be years of walking with friends and bringing whole communities of people with you. All your neighbor, we're bringing our whole cul-de-sac into the kingdom all at the same time. And they're all kind of coming to Jesus all together, and they don't even know it. If I said to any one of them, hey, we're doing a good job evangelizing you into Christianity, they would be out. They would jump off the ship, because that's not what they think is going on. They think they're just hanging out, having a good time, talking about Jesus, and their heart's changing, and their marriage is changing, and things are moving and changing in their lives, but they don't know what's happening to them, because I'm just walking with them. I just love them. They're great people. We're just kind of moving together into the kingdom, closer and closer to Jesus. I think this paradigm sets you free. It allows you not to have to worry about all this stuff, because you can't do it very well, and you've tried it and it didn't work very well. This just says, hey, just be friends with tons of people. Talk about Jesus openly and always. Don't do a bait and switch. Don't do the old, I got to know my neighbors for 5 years, and then I'll talk about Jesus. Have you noticed the longer you go in a relationship without bringing up Jesus, the harder it is to bring up Jesus? And then after you've only talked about the Broncos and the weather for 5 years, and then you go, hey, speaking of the Broncos, and then you try to do this weird transition thing to the gospel, and the Broncos to Jesus doesn't, I love the Broncos, but that doesn't really work. Broncos and Jesus don't really actually, sorry to say, don't really actually go together. So, but if it's just your whole life and you're just natural about it, if you're just natural, that's one for Ronnie. If you're just natural about it, then it just works a lot better. Okay, I'm going to stop talking. I can't see a clock or anything, but what time is it now? 3? 3:15? Wow. 3:50? 3:15, okay, gosh. Yeah. I owned a watch when I was 5, but I've never owned one since. But so anyway. Okay, questions, thoughts, comments, whatever. Just if you say them, I'll repeat it so it could be on the tape, and then we'll talk about it a little bit. Oh, come on. Do you have a book table out here? Not you one at a time. I do. The price has doubled today, but yeah, I have a bunch more books, and I only have a few DVDs left. But yeah, I have still another box or two of books. So. And your website's available? Yeah, and you can order books and DVDs, and there's other stuff about. I have a whole bunch of videos on sharing your faith on my website that actually says different stuff than this. It talks about how to tell stories. It's a storytelling thing on my website, and then I have a bunch of my old messages on there too that you can bore yourself to death with for years if you want to.
What would you recommend from your materials to pass on to other master brands?
If they want to answer the Muslim question, if it's a Muslim issue, I would say the book Muslims, Christians, and Jesus is the thing to do. If it's more on just sharing your faith with people here in America, then the Engage video and a Story for the Heart. Story for the Heart is 7 teaching sessions by myself and Jay Pathick, who I think Jay might be the best evangelist I know in the world, possibly. And so it's Jay and I. He's an incredibly dynamic, gifted young man, gifted speaker. So Jay and I co-teach this, teach kind of what I'm doing here now. That's called The Story for the Heart. And then the Engage series is the 9 nights in a bar. So the bar downtown Denver. So it's us speaking to people who don't know Jesus. So we start out first night. I just talk about Jesus just real casually and just kind of move on. Second night, we don't open the Bible even until the third week. So we're taking a whole group of unbelievers in a bar over 9 weeks. And actually, a bunch of them came to know the Lord, and a bunch of them are in Jay's church and got baptized the week after. And it was really cool. It actually worked. So we weren't just doing it for effect for the video. We were actually doing what I talk about, and it's on DVD. So that's kind of the practitioner side of it, showing what we do on the Engage. So the Engage and Story for the Heart are the two that would be kind of what I'm talking about. I think we're out of the Engage videos, so you'd have to order them from my website. And Story for the Heart, I think we have 5 or 6 more of those, which you could buy today. If you want. Yeah. The question was just, were there times in Beirut when we felt more or less stressed because of the politics of the situation? Yeah, for sure, post 9/11, things got stressful. So I would say from 92 to 2001, I would say relatively speaking, I mean, people have had issues with America for years just because I think a lot of it is just that America is the big, kind of the strongest country, not just militarily, but politically, economically. And whenever you're big, strong, anything, people don't like that. So I think a lot of it's just very practical. And because we have a lot of power and because we're just people, we have misused it sometimes. So I think people have always kind of had some issues with America, but not nearly like after 9/11, which always felt ironic to me, I have to say, because I always feel like they're the ones that, that's not fair. That you hit me, I didn't hit you. But then our response and whatever, I think, just felt wrong to the Muslim world for sure. So, being an American in Beirut after 9/11 did get more stressful. And then the next thing was 2003. I just remember nobody in the Middle East thought America would actually go into Iraq. And I can remember Chris and I, was the night before in March of 2003, the night before eventually we did start going in. And we were with some friends and we just said, we would never, because we know it won't work. It'll be a mess, and tribalism and democracy don't work together. I mean, everybody that lives in the Middle East or knows about the Middle East knows that we would get what we got. It wasn't a surprise to anybody, I think, that lives there. Just because it's very complicated. Iraq is a really complicated place like Afghanistan. These are maybe the two most complicated countries in the world, mostly because of tribalism. Not because of Islam or democracy, but just tribalism. And so when that happened, that made life intense. And then a year later, we were kicked out, and most Americans were kicked out of Lebanon. It was Syria and Lebanon's way of, kind of getting a little political jab in against the Americans that they could. And so they kicked us out. So that was a personal consequence of the war in Iraq, is we're no longer in Lebanon. But is God still in control and is life still good? It's great. I actually love what I do now, and I'm doing more of this now than I used to do. We used to live there, and I did very little of this. Now I had time to write a book and written the second book, Tea with Hezbollah. And so I'm writing and speaking more, and so that's great. So, God knows. I don't feel bitter about that at all, or, so it's just, I kind of think it's just the way it is. Yeah.
How'd you get home after they took all your stuff and get it down?
Oh, gosh, yeah. Well, that's right. I forgot. Actually, the rest of the story is really good. It's in the book.
It's in the book.
Woo! That's a good one. I like that one. Actually, you know what? It's not in the book. I have to tell the truth. What I did in the book, and it's funny, I don't know why, I told the story about up until where I told it now, because I was trying to make the same point that I made, and I also stopped the story in the book too. So it's actually not. They're actually great stories. There's a story about a Saudi princess. There's tons of great stories in the book, but the Iraq story isn't in the book. So I will tell it. So the end of it is they drove off. The funniest thing is they said, just like they do in the movies, they said, don't move for an hour. I had the bad guys always in the movie. They always tell them not to move. They did that. So they're probably watching John Wayne movies or something. And so they said, don't move. So we sat there for like 30 seconds until they drove over the hill, and then we kind of very slowly got up, and our hearts are pounding and, hands sweaty, and, we realized that we're alive. They didn't kill us, and the car's still there, which is kind of funny. But they took all the gas and all the money. So we got in the car, and there was some gas in it. So we drove back out about a mile to the highway, and then went right back towards, the west, towards Jordan, and eventually home to Lebanon. And we drove down to the next exit and got off because we were out of gas. So we thought we'd get off. So we got off at the next exit. And now this is May 1st of 2003. This is actually the exact day that President Bush stood on the aircraft carrier with a sign behind that said mission accomplished. It was that day that this was happening to us. And we got off and went into a town for help, a town we'd never heard of before called Fallujah. So we drove into the middle of Fallujah to the gas station. Well, then at that time, gas was a penny a gallon, but you couldn't get it. It was just hard to get. There was about a mile, or maybe there was maybe a 2-mile line. There was cars as far as you could see lined up, and we drove by them all because we didn't know what they were lined up for. And then we saw they were lined up for the gas station. We're like, oh, great. And so we pulled in, to turn around, and one of the guys there saw that we were, or maybe he saw me, that we were a foreigner or whatever. He came over and talked to us, and he goes, what happened? And I go, well, you'll never believe it, but we just got robbed, and we didn't have any gas. And And then all of a sudden there's a big crowd. In the Arab world, it's funny. Just like this, there can be a crowd. I mean, much of the world, actually much of the truth world is like that, isn't it? Crowds appear out of nowhere. So like 20 people that are yelling and shouting, and they pull Samir out of the car, and they get in the car, and then we're all out of the car, and then they drove off, and I thought, oh man, so now they've taken our car too. They drove off, pulled around like this, back to the gas station, filled it up with gas, and the owner of the gas station came over to me, and he went like this, ala rasi, which means it's on my head, which really means the shame of this deed is on my head, literally. I mean, in other words, I'm so ashamed of what's happened. I'm so sorry. And he said, please take our condolences. And I've just talked to the head sheikh, elder of Fallujah, and the elders of Fallujah would like to invite you for lunch and officially give their apologies. And we said, okay. And so they filled our tank up with gas and gave us an extra big can of gas. And then they took us into town, into the middle of Fallujah, and we went in, and there were about 30 of the leading men of Fallujah, and they welcomed us. We had they killed the sheep, had a huge sheep feast, an incredible feast that day. We sat down, there were 30 of them, there were 7 of us, we sat down, and the head sheikh, which sheikh just means elder or a kind of leader, it could be a tribal leader or a religious leader in Islam. He said to me, what's your name? Carl, and I'm Sheikh Sheikh Mahmoud. And he said, we just want to officially say we're sorry. We don't know who these men were, but if we catch them, we will kill them. Like, okay, thank you. Or I don't know. I mean, what are you supposed to say to that? And then we're so sorry. And can I just ask you, what are you doing in Iraq? And I go, well, it's kind of a long story, but I'm an American, but live in Lebanon. My other friends are from Lebanon and Syria. And we were over there a couple weeks ago, and we were thinking to ourselves, because we're trying to follow Jesus, and we're thinking, I wonder where Jesus would be right now. And we thought, I wonder if he'd be in Iraq, because Jesus was always in the place where the religious leaders that think they own him think he wouldn't be. So I said to this man, for instance, my country thinks Jesus is ours. And my people, my tribe, my religion, Christianity, thinks we own Jesus. And we think Jesus would surely not be in a place like Iraq. And so we thought to ourselves, I'll bet he'd be in Iraq. So we actually came here looking for Jesus. And he goes, you know what he said? He goes, did you find him? So I said, well, actually, I think we did. And we told him some stories of Diwania and Basra and Baghdad and just incredible experiences. And I said, I wonder even if we found him today. We weren't looking for him. We didn't try to be robbed. This didn't happen. We didn't try to have this happen. But here we are now with you. We're sitting with the elders of this town, which we'd never heard of before. And we're talking to you. And he said, I've heard that Jesus has a book. Is that true? I said, he actually does have a book. It's called the Injil, the Gospels. He goes, do you have one? And I sent my friend Isam out to the car to look. We had one full gospel, a full New Testament left in Arabic. And we brought it back in. He looked at it, and it says Injil Sharif, which means the honorable Gospels. And he looked at it, and he goes, is this the real gospel? And I said, it's the real one. And he put it to his forehead. He kissed it. He hugged it, and he started to cry. And he said, you don't have any more? No, I said, we gave them all away. So anyway, we talked for 3 hours over lunch about Jesus. When we left, they showered us with gifts. They just piles of gifts on us. They gave us baskets of fruit. We actually couldn't take it all. They gave us some more gasoline. They gave us money. Back in those days, the average wage was about $4 or $5 a month. They gave us $50 in cash, so almost a year's salary. And they said, again, Al Rasi, Ahlan wa Sahlan, we're so sorry, you're welcome here anytime. The elders of Fallujah welcome you. Would you please come back? Would you please come back? We want more of the book of Jesus. We want to talk to you some more. That was Fallujah. And we drove away that day feeling, once again, at the end of the day, very blessed. And when I went back a month later, exactly 1 month later, Fallujah had gotten so dangerous that the American troops, I actually tried to drive into Fallujah, the American troops wouldn't let me enter. They said, you can't go. And I said, yeah, but I know Sheikh Mahmoud. I said this to the guy with the gun, that American guy. I said, I know the leader. He said, you cannot see him. I said, well, please, he wants to see me. He goes, you can't see him. And so they didn't let us in, so we drove on. But that's the end of my story. Yeah, any other questions? I know it's a little dramatic. Hey, right here in the front row, young man, I like that. Yes. Were they terrorists that robbed me? That's a really deep question. A lot more to that question than you probably think. Well, they were terrorists because they weren't nice to me. They terrorized me. So I guess yes. No, actually, I think to answer what I think you'd want me to answer without, going too far down this road, I would say they were thugs, kind of just robbers. I think, in hindsight, they were probably people that, and then actually that road from Amman, Jordan to Baghdad became very dangerous. In fact, when we went back in a month later, we had to take Iraqi cars, and we had to get the Iraqi car right at the border and make sure the Iraqi drivers didn't talk on their cell phone the whole way, because what was happening is that Iraqi drivers would drive in foreigners. They'd call ahead, usually to Fallujah and Ramadi, and tell robbers there, when you see my car come through, pull us over, I'll pull over, then you rob these guys, and we split the deal. It was like a little racket going on. So when we went back in the second time, and it was pretty profound, because when I went back the second time, we knew that these robbers, I would say not terrorists, but just robbers, we knew what happened, and so it was hard. The second time back into Iraq a month later was really intense. And so I actually don't always do this, but I got Chris and our 3 kids at the time. Our kids would have been 13, 12, and 10. And I said, Dad's thinking about going to Iraq again in a couple weeks. What do you think? I think we'd like to make this decision this time together as a family. Because they had heard the report. The report somehow got back around to my wife that Carl had been taken in Iraq and hasn't been released yet. So she knew I'd been kidnapped in Iraq before I could tell her what happened. Until now, we're not sure how that happened. But so last thing she had heard is that I'd been kidnapped in Iraq, and then she didn't hear from me for another 12 hours until we got to Jordan. So we talked about it together, we prayed about it, and I just said, if you guys don't want Dad to go, if you don't feel comfortable, and Anna, our oldest, who was, I think, 13 at the time, said, she's the one that just got back from Rwanda Saturday. She goes, well, Dad, but isn't this what you do? And I said, well, yeah, it's what I do, but I could do other things. I could go to Egypt, or I could go across the street. We could go downstairs and have lunch with our neighbors. I could do lots of things. I don't have to go to Iraq. She goes, well, did you pray about it? I said, yeah. She goes, did you think God told you to do it? I said, yeah, I think so, but, I don't feel like I have to. She goes, Dad, you got to do what you always tell us. You got to follow Jesus. So, okay, there you go. So everybody agreed, and so I went back again. So, yeah, another question. Yes.